Why are underwater volcanoes the forge for deep-sea golems? In 2012, researchers exploring a hydrothermal vent near the mid-Atlantic ridge found something that should not exist. A creature encased in iron armor. Not scales, not shells, actual metal. Its body was covered in plates made of iron sulfide that had crystallized directly onto its skin, making it look like a medieval knight from the abyss. This is the scaly-foot snail, and it is not the only creature down there building itself out of metal. Underwater volcanoes are not just spewing lava and ash. They are creating life, strange, armored, nearly indestructible life that looks like it was forged in the fires of the deep. And the deeper you go, the weirder these creatures get. So why are underwater volcanoes turning deep-sea animals into walking suits of armor? What is in the water around these vents that is literally transforming living tissue into metal? And if something as small as a snail can build itself out of iron, what else could be down there covered in armor that we have not found yet? If you have seen our videos on squids and eels, you already know the deep ocean is full of nightmare creatures. But the animals living around hydrothermal vents are different. They are not just adapted to the dark and pressure. They are adapted to an environment that is actively toxic, an environment so extreme that it is closer to another planet than anything on Earth's surface. And somehow, life does not just survive there, it thrives. Hydrothermal vents are basically underwater volcanoes. They form along mid-ocean ridges, where tectonic plates are pulling apart and exposing the Earth's mantle. Seawater seeps into cracks in the ocean floor, gets superheated by magma below, and then shoots back out through vents at temperatures up to 750 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to melt lead. And this water is not just hot, it is loaded with toxic chemicals like hydrogen sulfide, methane, and heavy metals such as iron, copper, and zinc. For most life on Earth, hydrogen sulfide is deadly. It is the same chemical that makes rotten eggs smell bad, and in high concentrations, it shuts down cellular respiration. But for creatures living around hydrothermal vents, hydrogen sulfide is not poison, it is food. These ecosystems do not rely on sunlight like the rest of the ocean. They rely on chemosynthesis. Bacteria around the vents convert hydrogen sulfide into energy, and everything else feeds on those bacteria. This is where things get weird. The water around hydrothermal vents is so rich in dissolved metals that some creatures have evolved to literally incorporate those metals into their bodies. They are not just living near the metal, they are made of it. The scaly foot snail is the most extreme example. The scaly foot snail lives on the sides of hydrothermal vents in the Indian Ocean, clinging to rock in water that is boiling hot on one side and freezing cold on the other. Its shell is not made of calcium carbonate like normal snails. It is reinforced with iron sulfide. That is the same material that forms pyrite, fool's gold. But the craziest part is this. The snail does not just have an iron shell. Its entire foot, the muscular part it uses to move, is covered in overlapping scales made of iron sulfide. These scales are not smooth. They are jagged, layered plates that make the snail look like it is wearing chainmail. They are not decorative. They are functional armor. Hydrothermal vents are home to predators such as crabs, fish, and other scavengers that hunt around the vents for easy prey. When something tries to bite the scaly foot snail, it gets a mouthful of metal. The iron scales are hard enough to dull teeth and tough enough to absorb impacts. It is like biting into a rock. But how does the snail even build this armor? It has specialized glands in its foot that secrete proteins, and those proteins bind to dissolved iron in the water. Once the iron is bound, it reacts with sulfide to form iron sulfide crystals, which then harden into solid plates. It is basically biological metalworking. The snail is forging its own armor using the chemicals in the water around it. And it's not just the scaly foot snail. Other creatures around hydrothermal vents have evolved similar adaptations. There is a type of deep-sea worm called Alvanella pompeiana, the Pompeii worm, that lives directly on hydrothermal vents. They build tubes right next to the vent openings where the water is hot enough to kill almost anything else. The temperature gradient across their body can be over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Their tail is in water that is near boiling, and their head is in water that is barely above freezing. So how do they survive? Well, they are covered in a layer of bacteria that acts like insulation. More importantly, their tissues are loaded with heat shock proteins that prevent their cells from breaking down under extreme heat. Their bodies also incorporate heavy metals from the vent water, which helps stabilize their cellular structure. They are not building armor like the scaly-foot snail, but they are still using the metals in the water to reinforce their bodies. Then there is the Yeti crab, also called Kiwa hirsuta. This creature looks like someone took a regular crab and covered it in fur, except it is not fur. Those are setae, hair-like structures that are absolutely covered in bacteria, and those bacteria feed on the chemicals coming out of the vents. The Yeti crab literally farms bacteria on its arms and then eats them. It waves its claws over the vent openings to let the bacteria absorb hydrogen sulfide and methane, and then it scrapes the bacteria off and consumes them. But here's the thing. The Yeti crab's exoskeleton is also reinforced with metals. Just like the scaly-foot snail, it is incorporating dissolved metals into its shell to make it harder and more durable. The environment around hydrothermal vents is brutal. The water is acidic, the temperature swings are extreme, and the pressure is crushing. Normal shells and exoskeletons would break down quickly. By building themselves out of metal, these creatures can survive. And it gets even stranger. There are species of deep-sea mussels and clams that live around vents and incorporate iron and manganese into their shells. There are tube worms that grow over 6 feet long and have no mouth, no digestive system, and survive entirely on bacteria living inside their tissues. These bacteria convert hydrogen sulfide into energy, and the tube worms absorb nutrients directly from them. It is a completely alien form of life. But the most unsettling part? We have no idea how many of these metal-armored creatures exist. Hydrothermal vents are incredibly hard to find, and even harder to explore. They are scattered across the ocean floor at depths of 6,000 to 10,000 feet, mostly along mid-ocean ridges that are miles away from any landmass. Each vent system is its own isolated ecosystem. The creatures living at one vent might be completely different from the creatures at another vent just a few hundred miles away. In fact, scientists estimate that we have only discovered about 10% of the hydrothermal vents in the ocean. That means there are potentially thousands of undiscovered vent systems, each with its own unique collection of metal-armored creatures. Some of them could be much larger than anything we have found so far. Here is the thing. The creatures we have discovered around hydrothermal vents are mostly small: snails, worms, crabs, mussels. But there is no biological reason why larger creatures could not evolve the same adaptations. If a snail can build itself out of iron, why could not a fish? Why could not an eel or a squid? And if something that large incorporated enough metal into its body, it would be nearly indestructible. Imagine a deep-sea predator covered in iron scales, hunting around hydrothermal vents in complete darkness. It would not need camouflage because its armor would protect it from almost anything. It would not need speed because nothing could hurt it. It could drift through the water, slowly hunting for prey, impervious to bites, stings, and attacks. It would be the ultimate deep-sea tank. Actually, we have already seen hints of this. There are deep-sea fish that live near hydrothermal vents and have unusually thick, metallic-looking scales. There are crustaceans with exoskeletons that are far harder than they should be, and there are reports from deep-sea submersibles of large, unidentified animals moving near vents that researchers could not get close enough to study. But the reason these metal-armored creatures are so rare, or at least so rarely seen, is that hydrothermal vents are themselves rare. They form only in specific locations where tectonic activity is high. They do not last forever. A hydrothermal vent can be active for a few decades or a few centuries. Eventually, the magma chamber beneath it cools, the water flow stops, and the vent goes dormant. When that happens, the creatures living around it either die or they migrate to another vent. And that is what makes these ecosystems so fragile. The creatures around hydrothermal vents are highly specialized, and they cannot survive anywhere else. If a vent goes dormant, they must find another vent quickly, or they will starve. Vents are scattered across the ocean floor, so finding a new one is not easy. As a result, some species have evolved remarkable mobility. Some drift on ocean currents as larvae, searching for new vents. Others crawl or swim for miles across the sea floor. Here is the creepy part. If these creatures can travel between vents, they are moving through the deep ocean, and we have no idea what they meet on those journeys. Are larger predators waiting in the open abyss that prey on vent creatures? Are there other ecosystems between vents that we have not discovered? Are there creatures that live permanently in the open deep, away from vents, that have also evolved metal-reinforced bodies? Dissolved metals are not confined to hydrothermal vents. They occur throughout the deep ocean. The concentration is lower, but the metals are still present. So if a creature wanted to build metal armor, in theory, it could do so anywhere in the deep. It would just take longer. In the deep ocean, time is not always a limiting factor. Creatures there can live for decades, sometimes centuries. A deep sea fish could spend its entire life slowly accumulating metal in its scales until it is fully armored. We have seen similar strategies in shallow water. Some species of mollusks incorporate iron into their radula, the tooth-like structures they use to scrape food off rocks. The iron makes the radula harder and more durable, allowing them to eat tougher materials. Biological metal reinforcement is not unique to hydrothermal vents. It is simply more extreme there because the concentration of metals is so high. But think again about deep-sea golems, because that is essentially what these organisms are. They are living constructs built from metal and organic tissue. The larger they become, the more they resemble something from mythology, part animal and part mineral, something forged rather than born. In fact, that description is not far from the truth. The process of incorporating metal into living tissue resembles forging. The creature secretes proteins that bind dissolved metals. The metal crystallizes into solid structures, and those structures harden into armor. It is a slow, deliberate process that can span the creature's entire life. The result is an organism that is stronger, tougher, and more durable than anything made of pure organic tissue. Now let us talk about what this means for deep-sea exploration. If creatures around hydrothermal vents can build themselves out of metal, what does that tell us about the limits of life? It tells us that life can adapt to almost anything. Even environments that seem completely hostile can support thriving ecosystems. If life can exist around boiling, toxic, metal-rich water at the bottom of the ocean, where else can it exist? Scientists have started looking at hydrothermal vents as analogs for potential life on other worlds. There are places in our solar system where similar conditions might exist. Jupiter's moon Europa has a subsurface ocean that might host hydrothermal vents. Saturn's moon Enceladus is shooting plumes of water into space, and some of those plumes contain organic molecules and minerals that suggest hydrothermal activity. If life exists in those oceans, it might resemble the creatures we have found around Earth's hydrothermal vents. If that is true, then the deep-sea golems we have discovered might not be rare oddities on Earth. They might represent a common form of life throughout the universe. Creatures built from metal and rock, living in boiling, toxic water, thriving in conditions that would kill almost anything else. It is a humbling thought, because it means the weirdest, most alien creatures on Earth might actually be the most universal. But back to the Mariana Trench and the deepest parts of the ocean. If hydrothermal vents exist at 6,000 to 10,000 feet, what about the Hadal Zone, the deepest trenches that go down to 36,000 feet? Do hydrothermal vents exist down there? Actually, yes. Scientists have discovered vent systems in some of the deepest parts of the ocean, and the creatures living around those vents are even more extreme. At those depths, the pressure is so intense that it changes the chemistry of the vent water. The metals do not just dissolve, they precipitate out into solid structures. And the creatures living there have to deal with not just heat and toxicity, but also crushing pressure. So they have evolved even tougher armor, even denser tissues, even more extreme adaptations. We barely know anything about them. Getting a submersible to the bottom of the Mariana Trench is hard enough. Reaching a hydrothermal vent there is almost impossible. The few times we have tried, we have only gotten brief glimpses of the creatures living there. Pale, eyeless fish, massive amphipods, strange, unidentified worms, and all of them seem to be covered in thick, metallic-looking armor. So are underwater volcanoes the forge for deep-sea golems? Absolutely. They create an environment where life has to build itself out of metal just to survive. The creatures that result are some of the most extreme, alien, and terrifying animals on Earth. They are proof that evolution does not care about what seems possible. It only cares about what works. And if creatures the size of snails and crabs can build themselves out of iron, what is stopping something larger from doing the same? What is stopping a deep ocean predator from evolving into a walking metal-plated nightmare? The answer is nothing. It is just a matter of time and evolutionary pressure. In the deep ocean, both of those are in endless supply. Thanks for watching. If you have any ideas for other deep-sea mysteries you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you want to see more about the creatures living in extreme environments, check out our videos on squids and eels. Some of the things down there make these metal golems look almost normal.